How many places did you go last week? The gym, the office, dinner with friends, maybe somewhere you genuinely felt was doing you good. Sounds pretty normal. But I need to tell you something, and you probably won't believe me when I say it. There are 7 places that, every single time you walk into them, you lose something. Not money, not time, something you don't even have a word for. You walk in whole. You walk out with a little less, and you never notice. When I first started putting this list together, I thought I knew what was on it. Bars, casinos, the places your mom told you to stay away from, but the places near the top of this list. You probably go there every single week, and when you leave, you feel like you made the right call. What stopped me cold was the last 3, because the last 3 aren't places at all. If you're in any of these 7 right now, you won't feel danger. You'll feel comfortable, familiar. You might even feel like you're becoming a better version of yourself. That is exactly the problem. The Romans had a term, venalitas, the systematic commodification of human value. They understood, centuries before behavioral science could formalize it, that an environment does not merely reflect psychology, it manufactures it. Every room you enter is doing something to the person you are when you exit it. The first place is any venue whose commercial model is built on monetizing your loneliness. I am not here to moralize at you. That is a different conversation for a different channel. What I'm here to do is show you a mechanism, because the moment you see the mechanism operating, you cannot unsee it. And you will begin to recognize it in places that have nothing to do with where we are starting. These establishments, in whatever form they take, run on a precise behavioral loop. They take the deepest human need, to be seen, to be chosen, to matter to someone standing in front of you. And they construct a simulation of that experience, triggered not by your character, not by your presence, not by anything real, but by payment, by transaction. Your brain does not classify this as commerce. It files it alongside genuine connection, because the neurological signature is close enough to fool the system. And this is where the structural damage compounds over time. The more often that loop runs, the more your cognitive architecture begins to treat money as a legitimate proxy for relational investment. You stop developing the capacities that real relationships and real negotiations actually require. Patience, presence, the willingness to hold friction without escaping it, because you have been handed a bypass that roots around the entire process. Cicero, who understood the mechanics of power as well as any man who has ever written about it, documented this exact deterioration in the Roman court. He observed men insulated from authentic relationships by wealth and status, who had consequently lost the ability to distinguish genuine loyalty from performed loyalty. They were genuinely shocked when the performance ended. They had no diagnostic framework, because they had never been required to build one. The environments you train in determine the perceptions you carry everywhere else. The second place is any space designed with the specific architectural purpose of disabling your ability to count the cost. The modern casino is one of the most sophisticated psychological engineering projects ever constructed at public scale. No windows, no clocks. Chips substituting for currency, reducing loss aversion by abstracting the object of loss. Lighting calibrated to sustain alertness without tension. An irregular reward schedule that neuroscience has now demonstrated produces deeper behavioral entrenchment than any predictable payout ever could. But here is the insight that extends past gambling entirely. A man who cannot identify this architecture in a casino will not identify it anywhere else. The same mechanisms, intermittent reward, manufactured urgency, the illusion of meaningful agency inside a fixed system, exist in certain negotiation rooms, in specific professional relationships, in the social dynamics of particular circles. The casino is not only a place where money is lost, it is a diagnostic environment. If you cannot read it there, you will fail to read it at the table where it actually matters. Layer 2, the rooms that look like doors. This is where the resistance begins. This is also where the actual damage is done. The first room in this layer is any high-status gathering where you are the only person who does not already belong to the network. I know what you have been told. that this is precisely where you should be. That proximity to elevated rooms accelerates your trajectory. That discomfort in high-status environments is a growth mechanism you should chase. Here's what that advice removes entirely from the picture: information asymmetry. When you enter a room where everyone knows each other and no one knows you, you are navigating with a map that is mostly blank. Every person in that room has already been assessed, positioned, and assigned a weight in a hierarchy you have no access to. They know who is ascending and who is quietly stalling. They know whose endorsement carries value and whose is noise. They know the invisible debts and the unspoken alliances. You know none of this, and because you know none of this, you will do what every socially isolated human does in unfamiliar territory. You will overdisclose. You will offer your ambitions, your current projects, your frustrations, your intentions, all of it framed as connection building, all of it functioning as raw intelligence delivered voluntarily to people who understand its value far better than you do. In that moment, Cardinal Richelieu, the most effective political operator in the history of early modern Europe, maintained a single rule when entering any new court environment: observe for twice as long as you believe necessary before you speak once. He understood that in an unfamiliar network, every sentence you produce is an unconditional gift to people whose cartography of the room is already complete. Machiavelli's formulation was colder still. Your information cost must never exceed your information value. The moment you are surrendering more strategic intelligence than you are acquiring, you are subsidizing someone else's advantage with your own resources. The second room is the public exhibition of vulnerability before power has been established. Precision matters here, because the distortion of this principle has caused damage of its own kind. Vulnerability is not weakness. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, commander, philosopher, filled private journals with his fears, his recurring failures, his unresolved doubts. We know these journals today as meditations. What the historical record also tells us is that he showed them to no one at court, not his generals, not his advisors. They were the laboratory of his private examination, not the exhibition hall of his inner life. The question is never whether you are honest about your limitations. The question is who holds that information, under what structural conditions, and what power relation governs the room where it was spoken. The Byzantine court, arguably the most sophisticated political culture in human history, produced a principle that Western leadership literature has largely ignored. Disclosing weakness to a superior does not generate trust, it generates leverage. Not because all people are predatory, because information about your vulnerabilities exists inside a power structure, regardless of your intent. Once it is spoken, you have surrendered control of when it is weighed, by whom, and in what context. The third room, and this is the one that will generate the most pushback, is any social environment where you are repeatedly and enthusiastically invited. Read that again without dismissing it. I am not describing genuine friendship. I am describing a pattern. The question is not whether people enjoy your presence. The question is why you are essential to this specific room. Are you essential because of what you are building? Or because of the function you perform? The entertainer, the validator. The contrast that makes others feel more accomplished by comparison? Thomas Cromwell, who rose from the son of a Putney blacksmith to the architect of an entire governmental structure, documented this distinction repeatedly in his private correspondence. He described men he observed at court who were universally welcomed, perpetually included, and never promoted. They had become, in his phrase, necessary as furniture, comfortable, familiar, present, and entirely unthreatening to every person in the room who was actually moving. The diagnostic question is simple and ruthless. If your circumstances improve dramatically and visibly tomorrow, would the invitations continue? The honest answer to that question describes the architecture of the relationship more accurately than any amount of warmth that has been shown to you inside the room. Layer 3. The geography of your past self. We arrive at the deepest level. This is where mechanism becomes principle. The first psychological place is any physical space that was the site of a previous version of your identity. Neuroscience has confirmed what experienced strategists understood intuitively long before the vocabulary existed. Environmental cues and identity states are encoded in overlapping neural networks. When you return to the city where you were a different man, to the neighborhood that defined a chapter you have formerly closed, to the gathering of people who knew you before, your brain does not merely retrieve memories of that time. It reinstates the neural state associated with that context. For a measurable window, in a precise neurological sense, you do not just remember who you were there. You become him. Before Frederick the Great became the commander who confounded every major European power simultaneously, he made a series of deliberate architectural decisions about his own identity. He burned correspondence. He declined invitations to court contexts that associated him with the humiliations of his youth. He refused to be publicly positioned in environments that anchored him to the man he was before he decided what he would become. This was not sentiment management. It was environmental engineering. He understood that you cannot navigate new territory while standing on the map of the old one. The second psychological place is any context in which you produce permanent recorded material stored in infrastructure you do not control. This is the dimension Machiavelli could not have written about directly. He would have written about it immediately had he lived to see it. Every time you appear in someone else's recorded content, their filmed events, their live platforms, their documented gatherings, you are depositing raw material into a vault with someone else's lock for a narrative someone else will write, to be shown to an audience you cannot select, at a moment you cannot choose. Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth I's spy master, the man who dismantled a generation of conspiracies through the systematic management of information, operated on a single foundational principle. Every piece of recorded information about a person is a potential instrument, and the person who stores it determines when and how it is deployed. He was not describing blackmail. He was describing the structural reality of information within any power system. Your visibility inside other people's recorded environments is not a contemporary social tax. It is a permanent strategic liability with an unknown activation date. Every room on this map was dangerous not because of what happened inside it, but because of what it extracted from you while you were looking elsewhere. Your neural wiring, your strategic information, your identity anchors, your capacity for genuine discernment, your independence. The true measure of strategic intelligence is not the victories a man has accumulated. It is the rooms he never walked into. Victories leave records. The doors you did not open leave nothing, which is precisely what makes that discipline harder, quieter, and more decisive than any conquest. Machiavelli wrote that the gravest errors of rulers are not the battles they lost. They are the courts they chose to enter. You do not need to escape what you were never foolish enough to step inside.